What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 803. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how are the Cube streets treating you?
Pretty good, actually.
Yeah, you've been opening a lot of power lately. That's why
I've been opening a lot of power. Well, it's funny because I've been opening a lot of power, but also some of my decks that haven't had power, I've drafted these like Jeskai control decks. You would enjoy those, and my record with like Jeskai or Esper control has been quite good recently. So it's been fun.
And then when you don't have those, you have power. So.
Oh yeah, in spades. Actually, one of my recent videos, I have Lotus Gleemox Mox Jet.
Yeah, I saw that one.
That one was a treat. It was when you get an early Lotus or a Mox, in my case both, because I opened Gleemox and I opened Lotus in pack 3.
You opened the Mox pack 1.
But
yeah.
I had 2 Moxes in the first 2 packs. You can just draft a deck with a little bit higher curve and more powerful stuff, just that you wouldn't be able to get away with if you didn't have it. And then once you get the Lotus, then it's just like you can play like a bunch of 5-drops in a deck that in Cube would normally want to play like 2. You could play like 5 because when you draw that Lotus, oh man, all bets are off.
Is Lotus the best card right now?
Well, I think the only cards you could really make an argument for, pick one, pack 1, are Black Lotus, Time Vault, Gleemox, and Ancestor Recall. Time Walk has actually fallen a lot in my estimation. It's still a great card. I mean, let's be real. I'm going to pick it 99% of the time I see it. But I personally think in a team draft, you probably want to just take the Lotus. And then, like, if you open Lotus and Time Vault, right? I would take Lotus over Time Vault, and then you just can't pass any of the keys. And they might get it in pack 2, and that's unfortunate. But Lotus just always busted. I think Gleemox is a step behind those two, and I think Ancestral is kind of comparable with Gleemox. It's pretty close. Ancestral is really, really good. But my guess is that if we had 17 lands for Cube, luckily we don't, I think Black Lotus, Time Vault, and Gleemox are like the top 3.
Those are the 3. Okay. There's your little update on Cube. Yeah. Well, it's true though. I would not like that. I really wouldn't.
Well, the other thing is 17 lands for Cube would just make discussions worse, I think, because like there are people like Circa who can figure out separate the signal from the noise. But I bet you would look at it and be like, oh, wow, Demonic Consultation has a really bad win rate when it's still a really good card. You just have to know how to use it. Or you've got cards that I wouldn't be surprised if like Mishra's Workshop also like would fare poorly, though being very broken in the right deck. And that's interesting, I guess, but I could just see those like insufferable discussions. So
yeah, totally.
I feel like even though I've gotten a lot of use out of 17 lands, and I think it's a very valuable tool, we use it to prepare for all the Pro Tours, Arena Opens, all that stuff, the quality of discussions when it is invoked tend to be fairly low in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason, why we keep having Circo on, besides his shining personality.
Exactly. It's the 17 lands whisperer.
It's that, from the very beginning, we were very much up on, okay, data's good, but interpreting it's hard. And he's the best at that. He's the one that can get us the answers we need. By the way, you said Arena Open. Is there not one coming up like tomorrow?
Oh yeah, baby. And today's show will hopefully help you a bit with it. We're gonna be doing a show topic we haven't revisited in a while, and we would like to do more of level ups. But I'll let you go with your regularly scheduled intro. I don't want to throw the Sutcliffe train off the tracks.
That's right. So we're going to be doing the most common leaks that we see these days from limited players as a level up episode this week. Before we do, we want to say thank you to everybody who supports us over on Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. Thank you so much for your support of the show. It really does mean a lot to us. We're also supported by Ultimate Guard. They make the best stuff in the business. If you want to protect your cards, your decks, and your collection, you can head over to ultimateguard.com to see their full list of supplies. I mean, we're talking sleeves, deck boxes, long boxes, binders, backpacks, all that kind of stuff for you to make sure that your precious cards are protected at every stage. If you see something that you like, you can pick it up at your local game store or your favorite online retailer. Thank you very much, Ultimate Guard, for your support of the show. Of course I did this the wrong.
Jeff's gone for 1 week and it all falls apart.
Yeah, no kidding, man. Producer Jeff is just critical. Is he the most important member of our team at this point? Like he's
Yeah, I mean,
Feels like
it's
we
a
could do this
toss-up.
show without one of us, but
I was going to say it's a toss-up between producer Jeff and the guy who brings you your sandwich before we record. So
yeah. These are the cogs that make the machine go. I am currently digging up a question of the week because, again, without producer Jeff, these are things that get forgotten. I think we had one actually from when you first came back. I'm looking right now. Sorry.
I was telling Marshall right before the show that I did my first React video this afternoon.
Oh yeah.
Julian Carr, Pastry Time. He's a League of Legends commentator, YouTuber. He does a Magic series, Hungry on Plane, about like Magic history, and he did a video about my quarterfinals matchup in Pro Tour Berlin. It was my first Pro Tour top 8. And it was really fun. It's like a 20-minute video. So I watched it and interjected commentary and paused it and all that, like, classic React content. And it was fun. It was a different thing than I'm used to doing, but seemed pretty salient given that I was the person in the video. So I had a good time. I do feel bad though, because he had messaged me before the video went up to like see if I wanted to provide some comments for the video or anything like that. But it kind of got lost in the shuffle. He DM'd me on Twitter and I just kind of forgot to respond. Mm-hmm. So I ended up messaging him back and gave him my email. So next time that hopefully won't happen. But I did feel kind of bad that I'm like, oh, oops, I just completely didn't spaced on getting back to you in time. So
well, you get a lot of people asking you for a lot of things.
Well, yeah, but this would have been a fun one to be a part of. So instead, I did a React video.
There you go. I like it. I'm going to watch that. When is it going up on your channel?
Monday.
So, okay. Well, I get the early access, so
it's true. It's true.
All right. So one of the questions that I don't believe we've gotten to is from Dylan, who says, "What would make a format easier or harder for a player? What can someone learn about themselves when they find they struggle at a format versus being strong in another format? For example, I would typically get to the low 3 digits in Mythic for BLB and FDN, even won 2K in the FDN Arena Open, but I barely made Mythic in DSK and I'm still struggling to hit Diamond in DFT." And those are different formats too.
The acronyms all that well, but
sorry, yeah, Foundations and Bloomborough, etc.
Oh, Bloomborough, that's what BOB was.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that stands out to me is Bloomborough and Foundations are much less complex formats than Duskmourn or Dragonstorm. And I think the main things that stand out to me when it comes to what makes a format hard is, number one is how synergy based is the format. Because when you have a format like Foundations, I actually really like Foundations. It's one of my most drafted sets this year. I drafted a ton of Foundations. I think I drafted more of it than almost any other set except Duskmourn and Dragons. And it's actually probably comparable to Dragonstorm. Sorry, I always call it Dragons. It's the cards in Foundations are generally about as good as they look. You're not typically making them that much better by combining them with other cards. There was synergies, if you drafted a blue-black deck that had some graveyard stuff, or you drafted a life gain black-white deck or a tokens deck. Those definitely happened and they kind of mattered. But the good cards were about as good as they were all the time. There's not a whole lot of change. Whereas Duskmourn, so much of Duskmourn was do you know how to draft a good Delirium deck? Can you draft a good Rooms deck? Is your blue-white enchantment deck have the right curve and the right synergies and combos? And that is just harder to do. It is more complicated to try to combine cards to make them better than to just play cards and have them all be about as good as they are individually. So it's not to say Magic's easy. All these formats are hard and complex, and there's a lot of skill testing to it. Like I said, I think Foundations is a great format, but I think it's also pretty clear that formats where there's more complicated things going on, where you have to draft decks where Secret Gold cards is a good example. When we have a card that works really well in blue-green but is really bad in blue-white, that's kind of a secret blue-green card.
Right.
And that is a bit of extra complexity where if you don't know that, you'll draft it in your blue-white deck and it'll do badly. Or you won't take it in blue-green where it's awesome because you drafted it in blue-white and it did badly. So I think that the more synergy-based a format is, the harder it tends to be. Game speed can make a format less complex because if the game is over quicker, there are fewer decisions to make. But that's not always like, I wouldn't say that's a one-to-one track, because there are formats that are fast but decision intense. Like I remember Brothers War being, I think, reasonably fast, or LCI being pretty fast, but it felt like there was a lot going on, a lot of decisions to make. Whereas Phyrexia All is One was both fast and decision light. That was the worst format of the last 5 years, probably for me. I absolutely loved it. Or March of the Machines was like a reasonably fast format. I felt like you had to get on board quickly to compete, but also tons of decisions. That I think maybe my favorite format. That and Duskmorn, my two favorite formats the last couple of years, I think. So I would say mostly it's just complexity in terms of like what's going on in the drafting, what's going on in the gameplay, and those are not always the same things. But speed can kind of line up with that. And then if you look at the formats like Bloomborough and Foundations that the caller here mentions being good at, they are a little bit more like straightforward. And like in Bloomborough, for example, like you didn't go that wrong if you just took all the Frogs cards when you drafted Frogs, or took all the Squirrel cards and you drafted Squirrels. Like, I'm not saying again that there's not decisions and you shouldn't be proud of doing well in these formats. They are hard. It's always hard to play a game of Magic, but formats where you can just draft every card that says X, and then that is generally a cohesive deck. It's just not as complicated as Duskmorn, where a lot of what was going on was not quite as apparent on the cards themselves.
Yeah, I tend to think about it, at least when it comes to the gameplay part, as, there's many formats, I would say most of them at this point, where it really puts a lot of pressure on what you've already drafted, like how well you built your deck, what it consists of, and the power level of that deck, because a lot of the gameplay consists of doing the most you can at the moment. We're going to talk about this in a little bit, by the way. And that's kind of the game plan from beginning to end. Long-term planning isn't emphasized as much when it's more about what can I do right now that has the most impact over and over and over and over again. And that really rewards players. And this might be you as well, who draft well and who have, a solid build that allows them to curve out and allows them to deploy powerful cards. And they know the difference between good, powerful cards and ones that look good but aren't or don't fit the deck or whatever. But then, like, if you have the formats that are on the other end of the spectrum, like Dragonstorm is a good example of that one, that is the type of thing that, yes, you do need to be good at drafting it, because you have to hit, especially if you're drafting the 4 to 5 color deck that seems to be the standard in the format for the most part. You have to check a lot of boxes, and you don't want to go overboard. You don't want to be the one with too many draw spells and not enough action, but you don't want to be the one that just has no way to recoup cards in the middle to late part of the game. You'd prefer to have some form of inevitability at your disposal. And, sometimes you can find truly inevitable type situations or cards that give you close enough to inevitability, an engine of sorts that can run for a while. And a lot of people ignore those and just take the things that give you something right now. And you need to balance all of that out. And I do think that those are two different skills that end up getting tested, because when you actually get into the game, if your approach is do the most I can at every stage, that's actually not the worst. In fact, that's probably the recommended approach. Again, we're going to talk about it in one of our main topics here. But there are definitely formats where that's not the case. There's definitely formats where they reward long-term planning, inevitability, and game planning. And those are very different than the ones where you just sort of put the pedal to the metal and let it rip. And I don't even mean just purely aggressive, by the way. I just mean like, doing as much as you can, as quickly as you can, because there are formats, there's many of them now that kind of snowball. And that's kind of like Brothers War was. It's not that necessarily the games ended super quickly, but if you didn't have like 5 things in play on turn 4, it felt like, if you didn't play a card every turn starting on turn 2, even if the game lasted for a while, like you did need to actually be doing stuff, or you ended up falling a little too far behind. Yeah. Great question. Thanks for that. Let's do a quick crack-a-pack here, Luis. I've still been drafting Dragonstorm, though. I would guess, I don't track it, but I would guess that this would be my least drafted format in a while. I'm drafting maybe like once a day. Like it's not, it feels very, very repetitive at this point. And it's just sort of like, which version did you get? And there are fun little balancing things to optimize for. And there are cool cards and bombs and stuff that it's fun to open up and pick. But overall, it really loses a lot of its luster when you get into the draft portion and you're just kind of like, yeah, here we go. I'm drafting the same deck every time almost.
I guess I want to revise my further statement that I actually think I drafted quite a bit more foundations than Dragonstorm but it doesn't feel that different because Dragonstorm I really front loaded it because of the Spotlight series here. And because I did a bunch of sealeds when they had like the Winnabox ones and just like Magic Online sealed. So I played a lot of the Dragons format, but I agree that the drafting is really fun for like the first 20, 30 drafts and it dropped pretty sharply off a cliff afterwards, which a lot of formats don't do. Some were kind of a slow burn. Like Foundations honestly was for that, or Pioneer Masters. I got more into them the more I drafted them as I was discovering more things. Dragonstorm felt like the opposite, where we discovered what was going on fairly early, and then it was like, oh, that is just it.
That is it.
There really wasn't a whole lot more. Just the all-consuming nature of a 5-color deck is. As a designer, I would be wary of that when looking at the future, because like too much of 5-color slop feels like the format all just kind of bleeds into it, and it's like you mix all the beautiful colors, you just get brown. So
exactly.
That's a little bit how it felt.
And that is kind of how it is. I mean, it's not that it's bad, right? It's like I actually enjoy that, and I happen to enjoy this type of. I actually think it might be a genius design
because most people draft 1 to 4 times. So like in that sense, it might be more successful than most sets on that. And I do have to give them credit for that. We're not necessarily who they should optimize for.
Right.
But our repeat drafters are the people who on an average set will draft once a day or 4 times a week or whatever. This is not the best for them, in my opinion.
Yeah, it just ends up being a little one note. At any rate, let's go through a crack a pack here. Our first card up is Wind Scarred Crag.
One of the better lands, honestly.
Yeah,
like red-white is one of the better combos to start in. And, I think even the aggressive red-white decks are pretty happy to play these.
Crotic Nest Guard, the 4/4. I never played
really try to play, not play this card. Like I've sideboarded in before or played it in a sealed that needed something in that slot, but it just doesn't do anything. It doesn't beat any deck. So, you shouldn't put this card in.
No, I like the Pummeler, with Reach. Like that card is a serviceable 4-drop. Yeah, but Nest Guard's like so much worse. Underfoot Underdogs. The aggro deck plays it.
I wanted to like this more, and sometimes it can be good, but it's not a card that you want to take early, and you usually don't even play it.
No, it's very mediocre, although it does see at least some amount of play. Next is Focus the Mind. It's fine.
Yeah, it's a good card. I mean, there's some formats where this would have been a really early pick, but there's so much card draw in this format that you run into the diminishing returns issue where you just don't need to be first picking this card.
That's right. And similarly, Seize Opportunity.
Sam Party likes this card, or liked it at least when we were prepping for the Spotlight, and I never really. I tried it in a few decks. Was never that impressed with it as a combat trick or a card draw spell. So I right now I'm on Windscarred Crag.
Yeah, I'm a little low on Seize Opportunity as well. It suffers from the same thing that Focus the Mind does, except for it's just worse than Focus the Mind. So that means it basically never makes it.
But also in a worse color.
Yes, Nightblade Brigade, great common, like good design, lots of text on it, really, and it just doesn't do that much in the format. The thing is, it does do what it wants to do. Even against the other, it gets to attack. It usually gets in multiple times, but like half the time the 1/1 gets eaten. So it's like, I will take 1. And then the other time it's like, okay, your 3-drop hit me for 2. You really did it. And then the Death Touch only matters when it's attacking, because the stuff that you win the game with as 5-color deck almost all has flying anyway.
Yeah.
It's honestly, a sad one.
The cards in the 3 to 5 mana range in this set get pretty demolished by the 2-drop Mardu creatures that go wide and the 6-drop dragons.
And the 5s.
You don't want to be in the Nightblade Brigade, Crotic Nest Guard, kind of thing. Like Sago Pummeler does enough, but most of the other ones just not so good.
Right. Rebellious Strike. This is a +3/+0 draw card. Combat trick.
Playable, but
people play
really
it.
Nothing to write home about.
Yeah, it's just these. None of these are the cards that impact the game in a meaningful way. Hey, we got a Sagu Pummeler here. We're noting it as playable.
Sagu Pummeler, pick 1, pack 1.
Yeah, please no. All right, here we go. Let's do it. Breaching Dragonstorm.
Okay. Yeah, Breaching Dragonstorm is definitely, says the Red Dragonstorm. This is a card you can build around, and it's a strong card. So I don't mind first picking Breaching Dragonstorm. It's not one of the better Dragonstorms, I don't think. I think I like the blue and white ones the best, and the green one can be okay.
Yes.
But I would still be okay taking this first pick. Not the thing dreams are made of.
I don't know, man. This is pretty dreamy, because you have no idea what's going to happen. But you're right.
Comparing to that's true. But compared to the rest of the pack, it looks good.
Yes. Jeskai Monument.
Oh, I would take Jeskai Monument over Breaching Dragonstorm. I think the monuments are a really cool way to do mana fixing. They're quite strong.
You know what I think a cool way to do mana fixing is? Breaching Dragonstorm.
Sure.
See that? See what I did?
Fix your mana right
Just
up.
need one color. Next, it's your boy, Dragonstorm Forecaster.
Oh, I would take Dragonstorm Forecaster.
Yeah, that card has been good. You do have to,
draft orbs and
open. And the thing is, you wanted to take the orbs anyway, and then the other dragon is like totally fine, so you don't mind. But I this is where you want it. Right? You want to pick up your forecaster now and leave yourself as many opportunities because, the sweet spot is like 3, right? Like if you can get 3 of the other things, like this is what I was talking about when I was saying that
I think the ideal engine is 2 and 1, 2 orbs, one Boulder Fist Dragon, Boulder Horn Dragon or whatever.
Yeah, totally. And because, man, the orbs are great. I mean, they're just really good. Fixing
I'd
matters.
More than that. Like that's like minimum ideal. Like I mean, 1 and 1 is okay. Just 1 orb is still okay.
It's still okay.
Like, if you can get like 3 orbs and 2 dragons, then you're really talking.
Then you're cooking with fire. Next, we have 2 rares. One of them is Eshki Dragonclaw. That's the Teamer 4/4 Vigilance Trample Ward 1. And if you cast a creature or non-creature, you draw a card.
And it gets 2+1/+1 counters.
And it gets bigger. It's okay.
Yeah, that card is good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit of a commitment. Pick one. It's kind of hard to use. Like I actually kind of liked it in Vintage Cube. I think it's like not quite good enough, but playing a turn 3 off a Mox triggers it. So like you could really, you could really get there. Yeah. Now you see,
that's cool. I like that.
My guess is you are supposed to take the Eshki over the Forecaster, but I don't know. I haven't been keeping track of 17 lands data. I don't actually know.
I haven't either, but there's no
doing.
way. I would take Forecaster over. I would take Breaching Dragonstorm over it, and I would take Jeskai Monument over it too. I think it's fine, but I don't
think I'd take the Monument or the Dragonstorm. I think Forecaster is close. SQ is pretty big. I don't know. You play it on turn 4 and turn 5, you trigger it. It's pretty good.
It doesn't even have flying. It's not a dragon. Like,
sure. I think maybe the Forecaster is better. Yeah, you talked me into it.
I forgot, by the way, we did have a foil. It's Reigning Victor, which is the +1/+1 indestructible guy.
The Mardu hybrid. Not a big deal. What's our last rare?
Our last rare is United Battlefront.
It is not. This is the collected company.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Dragonstorm Forecaster. That's the format. Let's go.
That's it. I like Forecaster, then Breaching Dragonstorm, then Jeskai Monument, and then Eshki. Actually, I'd probably put Eshki above the Monument, but I like the Monuments too. But you
would take Eshki above the Monument.
I would. I'm just not. The thing is, the Monuments perform well. But when it comes to mana fixing, it's just strange. You just don't have to prioritize it. You almost never have to say, because there's plenty of packs where there's a random dual land or tri-land and just nothing else really interesting, like take the top 4 cards out of this pack. And it's just like, sure, I could take a, Focus of Mine or a Pummeler or something like that. Or I could just take the fixing and they all kind of meld together in that middle late part of the pack. But I like the high upside cards like Dragonstorm.
The more I drafted, kind of the lower I took fixing in this set, just because it's
just so weird because it is important.
Orbs are different because they do a really good job fixing and they give you like a board presence when you start playing your dragons. But most of the fixing, it's like there is a kind of a cost to the format to going too much on fixing. It's not just upside, and this format I think suffers a little because of how easy it is, and it's the same reason that. In videos or when we've talked about on the show, I'm just like, I would generally take Molten Exhale over a Tri-Land, which is not a pick you'd make in any of the other sets where Tri-Lands have appeared.
Totally, and the orbs turning the 5 mana common 3/3 dragons into 4/4s or 5/5s is totally game changing. It's a different thing altogether. Okay, let's get into our main topic here, Luis. So we wanted to talk about some of the. Well, first, we wanted to do a level up show because we haven't done one in a while. And it's always a challenge for us because, we have done level up episodes on most of the topics that we would want to cover, right? But it is important, from our side, like as a content creator, to continually reinforce the messages of like this show, how we approach limited, what we think is important, because what you realize is that even if people have already kind of heard it before, where they're like, okay, I kind of know where they're going, you can present it in slightly different ways. And also it really does act as a reinforcement for them to say, right, I need to remember, like, cause these things are hard to do, take on any endeavor that's difficult, a new sport, a game, a career, something like that. And it's not like, it's like, oh, well, I learned this and now I just never have to think about it again. Right. It's like, we all have to continually, upkeep ourselves. So with that in mind, we're going to do the most common / easiest ways to add win percentage to your game, or the secrets pros don't want you to know, even though they're not really secrets and the pros.
That's not true. There are no pros. And they don't.
But it sounded cool, right? Like that's
so cute.
It's so much better for the title.
What do you think your most common leaks are?
My most common leaks, I definitely, number one is, I don't know how to describe it, but just general autopilot / laziness, I guess. Like, not like, because most plays I can just do it, right? Like, how we talk about that there's like the goal, if you're not there yet, is to get to that like 80% realm where you're like 80% of the time, or 80, what play to make, and then the baseline play, and that will be good about 80% of the time or so, right? So you're just kind of like, you've got your fundamentals down. I'm there. But the other 20%, 1/5 of the time, you have to really go, now hold on a second. Is it still correct to do the normal thing that I see on the front surface here? Or is this a moment where I need to take more time and do some math, or I need to take some time and really, figure out how these next few turns are going to go before I commit to my play? And that's where a lot of times I'll just autopilot it and then just go, yeah, there was just a much better play there. And I just didn't bother to hold myself to, a more stringent level. What about you?
I think my most common leak is in my bedroom bathroom, but the office bathroom is a close second.
Oh my God. I'm glad I took the time to answer that question seriously.
I actually agree with you that mine is kind of the same as yours, except the numbers are a little different. We're like,
you're at 95.
I don't think about 95% of my plays. And like when I'm in practice, that can be great. When I'm not, or I'm a little sleep deprived, or I'm a little out of practice, which maybe is the case these days, I end up making more mistakes that I just shouldn't make based on like how well I play at a baseline. So,
well, you're an interesting case study too, because when you are at your absolute best is when you are on full autopilot, but you've done so much prep and understand the situations and the format that you're playing so well. This is like when you were like full time on the PT, like 2 weeks ahead of the PT testing every day. When you were in that mode, you were on, not autopilot in the derogatory way, but in the way of like, you were in that flow state kind of thing. I
was in the zone.
You were just in the zone. And it was like, cause you made those plays so quickly, but they would often be unintuitive, or they would be not the norm. And you were just dialed in that much, but it takes the work up front for you to be able to get to that point. Now your natural autopilot is still better than, basically everybody. So, you can lean on that pretty hard and still be able to come away. We're like, I can't,
But then I make some pretty bad plays. Like if you watch me cube, like I would say the average video, I make 1 to 2 plays that like, I just would never have made if I was in like full practice mode, which is fine. I've accepted that. Like I have 4 kids, man. Right. 4 kids, 2 jobs. I got a dog, like
totally.
A chinchilla too, actually. So we've got a lot going on, and I just can't hold myself to that standard anymore. But I agree that my most common leak is just not thinking enough about it plays. Well, it's actually a little different because I don't usually think about plays that much. It's more, my most common leak is not adjusting well enough to the level of practice where I currently am, which I sometimes can do. I remember having the same kind of, come to Jesus moment, as it were, when I first started full-time working at Direwolf, but still playing full-time on the PT. And all of a sudden you add a 40-hour-a-week job to that. And it was like my play got a lot worse because I was still autopiloting, but I wasn't practicing enough. So Yeah, good question. Even though I mostly set it up to,
Yeah.
to trot out the joke. Let's get to the show.
Yeah. So the first one that we want to talk about, and I would say that if you are beginning out in Magic or Draft, or you're kind of in the middle and you're wondering, for some baselines, Magic is a game that is very much, it depends, right? It is not the type of game that you can just give blanket statements on, but this is about as close as we get, especially with the way that sets are designed in the modern era, which is use it or lose it. Use up all of your mana as much as possible, particularly in the developing part of the game. Think the first 4 turns, something like that, maybe 5. That is a life-changing thing if you're not focusing on that now. If you are just sort of throwing your decks together and kind of just making decisions and, I like this card a little better, maybe this will be fine. If you just put all that aside and draft, build, and play your deck in order to use up all your mana, particularly in those early stages, you will see a significant bump in your win rate. That is probably the number one way to do it.
This is, the number one heuristic or tip that I would have for someone is strive to use all your mana every turn. Because if you were to if you're trying to teach ChatGPT how to play Magic or whatever, ask it about it, that is the number one thing where it's yes, that it can't go wrong. And sometimes the correct place to pass and use none of your mana, Magic's a complex game, but if the only stat you had was how much mana did this person spend in the first 4 turns, and you get Sirkovitz on the show, he's going to tell you it's you're 65% to win if by turn 4 you've spent mana every turn, all your mana every turn, and they haven't.
Yeah,
and it's and that's why good 1-drops are so important, because they let you spend mana on a turn where you typically don't get to spend that mana, and it is just when you've got 4 mana, play a 4-drop or 2 2-drops instead of playing a 3-drop. Because then on 5 mana, you can play a 3 plus a 2, because double spelling is a big part of this. Often in Limited, the first person who can double spell also gets a pretty significant edge.
Definitely.
And it's part of the reason that in Cube, cards like Snuff Out are just premium cards. In Cube, if you don't have 1 to 2 free spells or mana accelerants, you just are going to fall behind the people who do have those things. And in Limited, it's if you can go 2-drop into 3-drop into double 2-drop, you're going to be really far ahead, and that's why really efficient curving is just so important. Number one most important thing.
It is, and there's a few things that go into this. The biggest picture view on it is that it's a byproduct of the way that sets are designed currently, right? Where the difference between what you would call a bad common and a good common isn't that big anymore. It's there. It definitely matters. These are the edges that we teach on this show and that we go for. So I'm not saying to ignore that part. But even if somebody drafts a deck that has a good curve, but the cards aren't quite up to par, they're still affecting the board. They're still casting cards that do things that can turn sideways, that can block. They're not casting cards that just have irrelevant text and don't do anything. They're just slightly worse versions of the stuff that you're doing if you're listening to the show and drafting a bit better. And what that means is that everything's kind of compressed. Most of the time, if people are spending their mana, it is doing something relevant to the board. And even if you have the advantage of having cards that are more relevant to the board, if you're not doing it as often, you can fall behind just as quickly. And what it means is that there's a heavy tempo element to current era Magic where, if you do get stuck not using any mana up on a couple of those, say turns 3 or 4, something like that, it is really bad. I bet you your win percentage just falls off a cliff if that happens. And it is more or less unacceptable to do that, to the extent that you would rather, for example, use a removal spell sooner than you maybe wanted to, just to make sure that you're keeping up with the pace of the board, because comebacks aren't nearly as common as they once were. You definitely can fall behind and stay that way. The games tend to snowball a bit these days, and that means that there's a further emphasis on it. The other thing is, it's really interesting because it actually pushes the focus earlier in the day, right? If you don't draft a deck and then subsequently build a deck that is capable of doing these things, then you won't be able to choose to curve out. You will be stuck with cards in your hand. And as we've mentioned, that's a disaster.
I think if you took any limited set from the last 5 years and you have a game where on turn 3 you pass with an instant removal spell, like a decent one, right? Like murder level card or 3 mana deal 3 or something. If they play a creature on their turn 3, you are gonna kill it.
Yep.
Like 90% of the time. Like, because you just can't not spend your mana there when you have the option to spend your mana. Whereas, you go the further back you go, like all commons that we would are generally in the like C- to C+ range with a couple Ds right now. And it used to be, first of all, the average common was much closer to like a D or a D- than a C. That what we would call what we call a C today would be like a solid B to B+ in a lot of the sets.
Yep.
And some commons were just A's. There's Sparksmith and Timberwatch Elf or whatever. Like there's just some ridiculous commons, Rolling Thunder, go really far back. And you would end up, sometimes you'd play a 4-mana spell and it's better than their 6-mana spell. It doesn't matter if you didn't really curve out because like the cards weren't that effective. It's just all right now. It's like, and when we talk about modern limited, we really now mean like the last 7 years or something. Like we're not even talking.
We mean
the last
modern
2 years.
era. Now.
Like the last decade of limited, they've and things keep, I think, changing and like it's not like everything is static, but overall the range on cards is much tighter than it used to be. I think that's a big part of it. You're correct in identifying that. And when you spend 3 mana for a card, it's comparable to other 3 mana cards, and same with 4 and same with 5, which means if you play a 5-drop and they play a 3-drop, you're usually going to have the advantage, even if their 3-drop is a higher quality card than your 5. So, and certainly if you play 2 spells on a turn, you play a 3 and a 2, and all they play is a 4, you're definitely going to be ahead there. So making sure you draft a curve to make this possible is a big part of things.
Yeah. I mean, a good example, would be, these days, if people play a 3-drop, it's probably going to be worth killing. But what if, imagine an era where half the time people played Chrotic Nestguard on turn 3. Right.
And not even Chrotic Nestguard, like a Chrotic Nestguard that was like a 2/3 somehow.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like a worse version of that. So now all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I have a decision. Do I want to use my removal on that or not? And you're like, no, like that card can't even attack me. It's not even a great blocker.
I'm going to save it for the 3 creatures in their deck that are A+.
Exactly.
Relative to the format.
The rares
like
or
a Serra Angel, a Sheathed Dragon, a Mahamudi Jinn type card, which most of your cards are 4 mana 3/3s and 3 mana 1/4s or whatever.
Exactly. And now it's like when people play a 3 mana playable, let's call it, creature, you can't find one that isn't like, I should probably just kill that. Right? Like it has power and toughness, it's going to do something, and I'm going to kill it.
The exception is like a defender. Like sometimes in this format, for example, they play a Teamer Devotee and you're like, oh, I guess I won't use my removal spell on it. I'd rather just do nothing. But that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
Like if you have Molten Exhale in your hand and you go turn 1 tap land, and they're on the play and they play a 2-drop, turn 2, you play a land and you have a Molten Exhale and no other plays, what percentage of the time are you casting Molten Exhale on their creature? I guess Molten Exhale is actually slightly complicated because it could be instant speed, so you might wait to see what else they play. But let's say you don't have a dragon in your hand and it's a sorcery. If your average like opponent, if they play a 2-mana creature, Sultai Devotee, wow, that card's not that good. I'm still going to probably kill it because if I don't, I'm then going to tap out on turn 3 and turn 4 and turn 5 probably. And if I don't kill that and they kill my next play, I take 8 damage. Right. And then I don't get to play the spell because by then I've drawn 3 more cards and I have other things to play.
Right, totally.
So there's just not much wiggle room anymore. And that really leads back to spend your mana when you have it. Use it or lose it. You don't get a bonus for not spending your mana.
And so a couple of ways that you can think about this too, things to keep in mind, I should say, are that this doesn't necessarily mean curving out in an aggressive way. We're not saying you have to be aggro and use up all your mana in that way. It can also just be defensive plays like the removal that we just discussed, or it could be a play that sets you up for the late game, a globe or something like that. It's not really about like, turning creatures sideways and curving out and killing your opponent. It's about using your mana, at all in those.
And to be clear, playing a tap land counts as using your mana. Like there's not much of a better feeling than turn 1 tap land, turn 2 land 2-drop, turn 3 2-drop, another tap land. And you're just like, yep, I've maximally curved out. Totally. I mean, the way you can tell, I don't know if you get this, Marshall, but when I have a turn where I just curve out perfectly, I get that little boost of dopamine, where you're like, Oh, 3-drop into 3-drop plus tap land. Oh, this is beautiful. Turn
beautiful.
or in cube, where you're like, turn 1, fetch a surveil land, turn 2, counter your spell, turn 3, talisman, plus kill your creature. And you're just like, I used all my mana every turn like a good Magic player. And you pat yourself on the back.
Totally. And that's how it works. The other thing, one other way that you can frame it, this is like if you're not quite a believer, is at least use it as a tiebreaker. Yeah. Right?
We're not with all of these tips. Magic's too complex for us to like give you a one-size-fits-all answer, and you can throw it all out the window when the right things are happening. I've had some really interesting games of Magic where neither of us spend mana for many turns because the first person to blink would actually have a disadvantage, and that's not the common experience, but that does happen. And this heuristic wouldn't be very good there. But that being said, it like physically pains me when I have to play a 3-drop on turn 4, which sometimes you do because it's like, yeah, this is enough better on the board. This does what I want. Have you ever had to cast like a Flame Slash on turn 3 and not spend the other 2 mana because you just had to kill their creature?
I just hate that. It's the opposite of what you just described, right? It's like I want to pat myself on the back, but I just like I'm taking my medicine.
There is a real thing here. The reason these things make us feel good or bad is because we played so much Magic, and the one that makes us feel good generally wins us the game. The one that makes us feel bad does not win us the game, and we know that. Our bodies know that.
Yeah. So the way to frame this big picture is this is your baseline. There will be exceptions. They will happen somewhat frequently.
They have to justify themselves.
They have to justify themselves.
Yeah,
exactly. They have to say
reason
you need
to not spend all your mana.
Yeah. And if it's not a strong reason, then just spend your mana and figure it out later. Okay. Yeah. Now, in order to do this,
to number 2.
Yes. One of the requirements to spending your mana is that you need to have a better mana curve.
Yeah, and like we just talked about, so much of Limited these days is curving out, and the way that starts is during the draft. Or sealed deck building, but you have a lot fewer options there, so I'm mostly going to focus on draft, because in sealed, it's like, oh man, the sealed has no 2-drops, and sometimes that means you actually just need to play a different color, but often you're just going to play the best curve you can, and there's not much else you can do about it. So, in draft, here's one way to look at it, and if you've watched us draft with the Cracker Packs or the walkthroughs or watched either of our videos, part of the reason it's pick 3 and we're deciding between like a 5-drop and a 2-drop, and we're going to take the 2-drop almost all the time, unless we're talking, one of the better cards in the set, is you know what happens when you have too many 5-drops and too few 2-drops? It's a disaster.
Disaster.
Your deck doesn't curve out. You're too slow. You have to mulligan more hands because you're like 4 land and 3 5-drops. That's just not a keep in most formats. Whereas you replace one of those with a 2, yeah, you're probably fine. What happens if you have too many 2-drops? That's not really a thing. Like, because once you get enough 2-drops, you can just focus on other things, or you just play more 2-drops and it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's pretty much impossible to have too many 1, 2s, and 3s. It's very possible to have too many 4s, 5s, and 6s.
Yeah.
So early in the draft, and even late in the draft, but early in the draft especially, I prioritize the cheaper cards almost every time. And the reason is, if you get to the pack 3 and you're like, I've actually got lots of 2s and I don't have enough high end, it's really easy to pick up high end. And going back to even what you mentioned before, the average 5 and 6 mana commons, they're still pretty powerful. Even if they're not the ideal one, even if they're not an uncommon or a rare, like, yes, the difference between Meringue River Regent and a 6-drop common like a Durgar Island Dragon, that's pretty big. But we're talking a top 10 card. Mm-hmm. The difference between Durgar Island Dragon and like any other 6-drop that you can talk about that isn't a rare is just not that big, even if some are definitely better. So it's fine to pick up your expensive cards late, as long as you have enough early cards. Because if you don't have the early cards, the expensive cards aren't going to help you. You're going to be too far behind by then. You're going to lose by then. So I basically look at it as you have to fill your 1, 2, and 3-drop slots. 4s, 5s, and 6s are kind of like, yes, you want good cards in these slots, but it's just not critical that you get enough of those. I've had plenty of decks across all formats where it's like ton of early plays, not as many expensive plays, or the expensive plays are maybe a little more on the, common honey mammoth type side of things, which are just like fine. And they do fine. The decks that have too many expensive cards, even if they're really good ones, just typically don't. There's exceptions. You had a mom deck that had Elish Norn and Sunfall. You could probably survive having a bad curve because like these cards absolutely take over the game. You end up with too many expensive cards in most formats, and you're going to get too punished.
Yeah.
Another thing. Oh, good.
Well, I was going to say the other thing that one of the other benefits that you get out of focusing on your curve, besides being able to just deploy your cards, use up your mana efficiently, and get that advantage that we talked about from our first point, is, I've been putting these creatures and things on like a litmus test of what if my opponent uses a 2 or 3 mana removal spell to kill it? How do I feel? right? And if you have a lot
great
of
point.
cheaper threats, that protects you against that, right? Because if you play a 5-drop and they use 2 mana Molten Exhale to kill it, that feels bad, not just emotionally, but your win rate, your tempo is going to take a legitimate hit. But if you play a 2-mana creature and they use their premium common Molten Exhale to kill it, and it's even money and they had to react to you, you're ahead. That's great. That's at least parity,
if not ahead, at least parity.
You. Yeah. And so, when you think of it like that, that is another thing that pushes you towards towards a cheaper, better curve.
Well,
and that's on top of the benefits you're already getting.
And even to talk about efficiency, what's easier to, if spending all your mana is a puzzle of like, how do I make my spells add up to the amount of mana I have? Is it easier to do that with cheaper cards or expensive cards?
Exactly.
Shocker.
They're smaller puzzle pieces and you can fit them into more places. Because think about your curve, from 1 to 4. What is that? 10 mana, 4, 7, 9, 10, 10 total possible mana that you could have spent. And the bigger the blocks, the harder they are to fit into those pieces. So, you can have a better chance of actually doing that.
Part of why we say that, like, there's some cards that, like Focus the Mind, for example, that cost less mana when you like meet a condition. So you're not ever really playing a turn 3 Focus the Mind, but efficiency still matters on turn 7. On turn 7, the fact that you get like a 3 mana discount on this creature, like if there's some creatures that you can play for on the cheap once you've met conditions like enough cards in your graveyard. It still matters. Getting to play a 5-drop plus a 2-drop that's really even like a 5-drop in terms of effectiveness, that mana efficiency matters even in the late game.
Yeah, that double spell thing still counts even at that point in
definitely.
the game. Mm-hmm.
And another thing is when you look at a curve, don't get hung, when you talk about 2-drops, don't get hung up just on creatures, because that's also something that you want to look past. Spells that affect the board count as early plays. Fresh Start counts as a 2-drop. Molten Exhale counts as a 2-drop for your purposes. If you're attacking, yes, you need to know how many actual creatures that can attack them. But like, look at 5-color dragons from this format. Molten Exhale, Teamer Devotee, Fresh Start, Caustic Exhale, Dispelling Exhale, all the Exhales are fantastic. These all go into like my calculus when it's like, do I have enough early plays? It doesn't mean just things that literally affect the board. Mana Leak, I consider a 2-drop, right? So when I sort my cards, I've got my sorting method that I like. I have like the curve of creatures from like 1 to whatever. And then I have like lands in the middle. That's how I like to look at it. And then spells. And some spells I'll put in the creature curve because they're like, when I look at a card like Grist or Oko, I consider that more of a creature than a spell. And then I look at, what do I have of my spells that are also like affecting the board? So like an Abrade is a very different card than a Regrowth. Like Regrowth, 2 mana, get a card back from your graveyard, or Auroral Procession. That's just not a 2-drop in any way, shape, or form. Like you never cast it on turn 2. I guess you could evolve in Wilds or something. And it's not going to affect the board at all. But Molten Exhale, yeah, that certainly counts as a 2-mana card and is very relevant there. So make sure if you draft the good curve, the efficiency becomes easy.
That's right. Now, our third one, this is one that Paul's talked about a lot and you've talked about a lot. And I think it's one that is
more eloquently, though, I think.
It's so easy to overlook this one, which is the trap of double mana symbol cards.
Oh, huge trap. So many people get caught by this because it just seems most players, when they look at a 2 and a blue card and a 1 blue card, are like, yeah, these are both 3 mana blue cards.
I'm playing
one's
blue.
Slightly better than the other.
What's the problem, right? But the reality is that you're probably not accounting for how much harder it is to actually cast double mana symbol cards than their single pip counterparts, but even sometimes gold cards can be easier.
Gold cards are almost always easier to cast.
Yeah.
Because a card that costs 1 red and 1 green mana is in a red-green deck, not that hard to cast. Sometimes you'll draw double mountain or double forest, but still not that hard. And a card that costs red or green is quite a bit harder. Like you're way less likely to have that in like an even split. I don't know what the percentages are. Once again, we'll invoke who shall not be named here. But next time Sirkovitz is on the show, we can ask him. But when you look at a double pip card, it goes from being here's a card I can play on curve like a 1 and a green card to a green card, a Keen-Eyed Curator. It's like you really should not expect to play this card on turn 2 a lot of the time.
That's right. And the shortcut you can use is you can say, if you add 1 or 2, it's not actual mana, but the time that it would take for you to deploy this card on average, and you still are happy with the card, then sure, you can put it in your deck. But if I showed you a very strong card, that was 1 and a double color, I can come up with an example, for example, like one double red, and let's say it's a 3-drop and it's an aggressive card.
3/3 haste.
Right. Something that you really want to make sure that you get down as early as possible. Turn 3 is when you really want it. Turn 4, maybe it's okay. And then turn 5 plus it really starts to lose its luster. Versus, let's say a card that has the exact same cost, 1 red, but it's an instant that does 6 damage to a creature, something like that, like a really nice removal spell, maybe even a little upside on it. Well, it's interesting because that actually gets inverted. It won't be that common that you actually really want to deploy that on turn 3. You may not be able to even if you did, which is the downside, but often that will actually get better as the game goes because you'll find more relevant targets that cost 5, 6, or 7 mana. And if you're playing red as one of your primary colors, now you can actually assume that you're going to be able to cast it by that point in the game. But And you would still be happy with it as an efficient removal spell at that point. So it does matter when you intend to cast these cards. Basically the earlier in the curve, the harder it's going to be. If it's a double mana card and it costs 2 mana, in other words, it's just red, white, black, whatever, that's very, very difficult. And if it is required or encouraged that you get that down on turn 2, you should not plan on that happening very often. And if it gets a lot worse as time goes by, that might be a card you just don't want to take or put into your deck. Seriously, it's that hard unless you skew your mana really, really hard. Where if it does, if you're still okay with it at 4, 5 mana, something like that, then it might be a thing to do.
I think a good rule of thumb is like a triple color card like costs about double. Like a card that costs black. I would say you're going to be most likely around casting it around turn 6 when you have 3 swamps and 3 islands or something along those lines. A double color card, a black card is more like a 3 or 4 mana play.
Right, 2 mana extra or something. To
use a card like Ash Zealot, red, 2/2, first strike haste, and then when they play a card from the graveyard, they take 3. A very good card. If it was 1 in a red, I'd be snapping that up. I just typically didn't draft that card because a red card, it's basically like a 4 mana card or a 3 mana card in a lot of functionally the ways, and it's just not good at that point.
Right.
Same reason that playing, a card like Sunfall or, Elish Norn, as I mentioned before, I would play those even if white wasn't that big in my deck because the impact they have in the game at any point is incredible. Or like by the time you have 7 mana, 2 white is just not that hard. But a white card, you're talking like an Anafenza or something. Yeah, you didn't splash Anafenza, and often you wouldn't take it if you're like, this deck wants to be a 9/8, 9 islands, 8 plains deck. I'm not really that interested in a double white card that loses its luster if I cast it after all my creatures and later in the game.
Yeah, I think, the big picture view on this is that it is easy to forget because it's all we have that our typical mana bases are not very good in limited. Your 10/7 mana base, your 9/8 mana base, that is not very good. It's not very good at producing the colors that you will typically need, and you need to be very aware of it. I know it's just what we're used to, right? You don't really think about it being good or not if you have a 9/8. It's just what you do, right? But if you zoom out and you ask yourself questions like, is my mana base good at producing all 3, both of my colors by turn 4, or double mana symbols of both by turn 4, or whatever? The answer is almost always not really. It's not that good at that. You would need to have 2 or 3 dual lands. If you look at the mana bases of constructed decks, I know it's apples to oranges, but I mean, they are absurd, right? They are crazy how much mana fixing they have to make those decks
cringe
work.
When they have like 4 sources that don't provide one of their colors,
Right.
These decks in standard play like 2 basics or something.
Exactly. And in ours, we're just really out there on a limb, and it's easy to forget that. Now, I did want to ask you, Luis, let's give that example I gave. I have a 1 red aggressive card, and it's a rare. I'd really like to play it. Where is that line where, maybe I'm not guaranteed on 3, but I could at least get it on 4?
Let's not talk about a theoretical card. Let's talk about Brazen Scourge. I think it's a good example. That's 1 red, 3/3 haste, right? Like if you cast it on curve, this card is good. It's good in an aggressive deck, and red, typically can provide that. I would want ideally like a 10/7 mana base before I wanted this card, which you can do sometimes, and sometimes you can go like 11/6 if you're able to. But I would say like a 9/8 deck, especially if red is the 8, you just can't run that card, or you shouldn't run the card, because we're talking a card that does, lose value relatively quickly if you don't have it on curve. And
Okay.
it's just a really good point that the typical limited mana base is actually bad. We take lands really highly as a result. Even in a 2-color deck, I like having, like my black-red deck, if you add 2 tapped red-black lands to your deck, or like, Evolving Wilds or whatever, your deck's going to get quite a bit better.
Way better.
I think a good comparison is Cube. Cube is limited. Cube is between limited and constructed. I think it's got elements of both. But even when, let's say you're straight blue-white, how do you feel at the end of a Cube draft if you have no duels in a 2-color deck?
Right. No way.
You feel terrible. You feel like well, the problem is
you made a mistake.
You play 3 rounds with your blue-white deck, and Cube even has more intense color requirements, so it's like a little different because you are playing cards like Counterspell and Wrath of God in the same deck pretty frequently. But like your average blue-white deck or whatever, or blue-red deck or any 2 colors, it doesn't matter. Where like if you played a 9-8 split in Cube, you're just going to lose like 2 games based on mana that you would have otherwise not lost if you added 4 Tundras to your deck or the equivalent. And in normal limited, it's true. The 9-8 green-black player versus the 7-7 3 green-black dual player, I expect over the course of a draft to look 1 or 2 games, which is a really big amount to be impacted by this. Maybe not fully decided, but the difference between you have a Jungle Hollow 2 swamps in your opening hand and you just get to keep and have a great curve versus 3 swamps because the Jungle Hollow they didn't draft turned into a swamp, and now they have to either mulligan or just have a hand where you don't make a play till turn 3 because your 2 drops green. You might just straight up lose those games. So
huge.
So double color cards are, especially cheap ones, approach with great caution. Expensive double color cards generally fine. My 6 mana card that's double color, I just expect to be able to play it because most of the time you'll be able to.
Yep. So the big picture takeaway from this one is that they are more impactful on your already mediocre mana base than you're probably guessing, and to be very, very skeptical of that. Those are the types of cards that can absolutely screw up that curve that we talked about and lose you a game. Next up, splashing and why you probably shouldn't. Splashing, this is another overlooked or undervalued aspect. It's similar to the double mana symbol thing where it's like, well, this card's good and I'll just splash for it, right? There's a casual approach to splashing, I think, that is incorrect. The cost that you pay for messing with your mana that was already not very good and you just made it worse, by the way, is usually not worth it in the aggregate. I know it's tempting. There's a cool bomb or there's something that's doing something that maybe your deck isn't very good at, a removal spell or something like that, and you really, really want to try to get that splash in there, but it compounds very quickly. The times when it punishes you, when you either you draw your splash card and not the mana for it, or you draw your mana and it prevents you from casting other stuff, those are, again, very, very, very tough on your win rate because you're not able to deploy your card, spend your mana, and do the things we were talking about in our first point. They hit that really, really hard, but it feels kind of like a hidden cost because you make that decision during draft and deck build, and then you just sort of accept that you have put together a reasonable deck and off you go, but really you haven't, and you're just kind of waiting for that win percentage to come out of the woods and bite you, basically. And this happens, in my mind, I see it way too casually, Luis. It's like, it's thought, oh, I'll just splash. This card's good. I'll just splash for it. And it's like, you're giving up a lot, right? Like,
I mean, I have some history here. I have a good anecdote. I remember testing for Pro Tour Dark Ascensions. This is in Hawaii. It's the one where Kibler and PV played in the finals, the red-green ramp mirror. And we were doing draft testing at the CFB house, and I kept splashing, and Bennis kept getting mad at me. He's like, dude, why do you always splash cards? I'm like, Ben, look at this deck. Would you not splash whatever powerful card? He's like, yeah, I guess I would. And then after he thought for a while, he's like, I know what's happening. You draft because you want to splash cards. So by the time you're like, hey, would you splash this card? You have drafted a deck where, yes, I would splash that card. But you shouldn't be doing that. You need to stop doing that. It is not good. This is a 2-color format. This is not a 3-color format. And he was totally right. I've learned a lot about limited from Ben. Not a lot about other subjects, though. That I managed to emerge unscathed there. But when you have in the most formats, and Dragon's Storm is a different. So like, just set that one aside because that a million ways to fix 3-color base, more 5-color decks than not 5-color decks. None of this applies there really. Look at a set like Foundations. I drafted a ton of
I'm
Foundations,
looking
and
at
I
it
did
right
not
now.
splash very much.
I'm looking at
Look at a
you
set
had
like
the
Bloomborough.
same idea I did.
I drafted a lot of Bloomborough, and I did not splash very often. When the format facilitates it, when there's like 10 common duels, an Evolving Wilds, let's say a Prismatic Lens or whatever, some kind of artifact that's like decent at fixing, and maybe green also has some fixing, then you'll often be like, oh, I'm going to be green black and splash this good red card or whatever. But most formats, putting in like 7/7/3 is an unacceptable mana base. 7 islands, 7 plains, 3 swamps to splash even just 1 black card. This better be 3 and a black, you win the game for me to want to do that. Like we're talking like the best of the best cards. Because you already, going back to our previous point, 9/8's already not a good enough mana base. When you start dropping less than that, you're just going to not be able to cast your spells. The cost of splashing isn't just that sometimes you draw your off-color card and can't cast it. It's that sometimes you draw your swamp and you don't draw plains and your blue-white deck can't play half of its spells.
Right.
And it's sometimes that you play a tap land. That's even a cost too. It's not much of a cost. We generally are good with playing tap lands, but playing a tapped white-black land in your blue-white deck, you need to draw your 4th land to play your 4-drop. You draw that. That's a cost too. I would say the burden for me to splash now that I've kind of gotten away, like this is a while ago and I've learned, and again, Modern Limited, all these points compound on each other, which is why we all have them in succession here. Curving out's also more difficult when you splash. And you're putting yourself at risk of not being able to play cards. I think that my threshold for splashing is, 1, does the format give you a lot of easy outs to splash? Look at Dragonstorm. When you're red, white, in Dragonstorm, you almost always just like, yeah, I could play this blue card because I got a Jeskai Monument and a Mystic Monastery and blah, blah, blah. And like, it's just like, I have 5 blue sources at no cost, maybe 5 or 6 sources because you had to play 1 island to make it work. Sure. Formats like that, splash to your heart's content. The other is if you get an early reason to be 3 colors. And that's kind of weird because let's say it's in Foundations and you're like, you open like a white bomb in pack 2 and you're blue-black. Sometimes it's like, well, I only have 2 really good black cards and 2 mediocre ones and a lot of good blue cards. Why don't I just take this white card and see if I can just go into blue-white? And that can also be a good off-ramp, and that's totally fine. Most of the time, you're not going to be splashing from too early in the draft because you could just pivot it. But let's just say, let's go back to this example. You have a great blue-black deck, but you open a busted white card that's only single white. So then you can splash and you can draft towards it, even in a set that's like Foundations didn't have like a ton of mana fixing. It had common duels, but you still just didn't want to splash that often. Well, maybe there you go out of your way to pick up, your Tranquil Coves and Dismal Backwaters and whatnot in order to make it work. And you can make it work. But most of the time, you just shouldn't splash. Like, I think that the threshold is pretty high for me. It has to have either good enough fixing that you're costing yourself very little, or the card has to be quite a bit better than the other option. Then, like, we're talking going from like a 5 to an 8 or a 5 to a 9,
right?
Not going from like a 6 to a 7 or even a 6 to an 8 is still kind of dicey. It's like, yeah, this card is a lot better than the alternative, but how many games am I going to lose because of all the other factors?
Totally.
I think a sweet spot would be if you're a 2-color deck and you want to splash, let's say 1 or 2, because the difference between 1 and 2 isn't that big. Once I'm in for splashing 1 card, I often want to splash a second. I want to have like 4 colors, 4 sources of the splash color, ideally 5, at a cost of maybe 2 of my main colors, ideally 1. So like what I mean by that is you're this blue-white deck that wants to splash a black card. You have enough duels that you're playing like a black-white duel, a blue-white duel, an Evolving Wilds, and a swamp. And there you cost yourself 1 primary source because you're playing a swamp. The other 3 sources of black, they don't really cost you a blue or white source. They are tap lands, and like I said, that hasn't a disadvantage, but you can still manage it. So that's generally what you want. Once you get more than like a couple of cards and you're talking about needing 6 or 7, well, you're just playing 3 colors, and there's a lot of formats where that's completely unacceptable. So you really should not strive to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that the two, if you want to get into the weeds a little bit, one of the things that you want to consider is how much better is the splash card over the thing that you are going to play. And as you said, Luis, if it's a big gap from a 5 to an 8 or a 9, okay, fair enough. But that is not that common, right? Think of, let's say you're playing Tarkir Dragonstorm and you take like a mediocre common like Deuce-Suit Earth Carver, right? The 6 mana 4/4 reach that endures 3. You know, that card is perfectly fine. When you play it on a battlefield for 6 mana, it's like, sure, it makes 2 things or it makes 1 big thing. It has reach. It's like, it's okay. If you compare that card to even some of the more ambitious dragons or higher end cards in the set, that Earth Carver is gonna be in the ballpark of many of them. And yes, of course, you can find some that it's much, much better to do the big bomb or whatever. And I'm talking mana for mana, like 6 mana cost here. You know, if the Earth Carver's in your core colors and the other one isn't, you are almost always better off just sticking to your guns and just playing a basic card like that really is nothing to write home about, and not a card that you'd be excited about. If you do, and you and I had the same idea, if you go through, I'll challenge you, go through and look, especially this primarily applies to two color formats. 3 color formats get kind of weird because you're kind of by default splashing from the norm. But if you look at any 2 color format, and you can look at it on 17 lands, and you can look at the color data and look at the 2 color straight up, you know, Simic, blah, 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 blah decks, and then look at the next column down, which is the one that has plus a splash. And across the board, if you compare Simic plus a splash, Boros plus a splash, it always goes down with very few exceptions, your win rate. It is, as the rule, it's worse to splash. You will have a lower win rate. That doesn't mean that there's not exceptions. Magic is a game of exceptions, and you do need to look for them when it's appropriate. I think the other thing that people tend to overlook is sometimes they say, I'm going to splash a card, and they don't realize that they are also putting other cards in their deck that they wouldn't normally put in there in order to accommodate a splash. Think spend 3 mana to get an extra mana, right? One that maybe searches up a land or like a globe or a mana rock or something like that. One of those cards, and you think, well, I just need that to splash the card I want to splash. Well, now you've just put even more weight on your splash card because you're playing a card that doesn't otherwise do anything and that you wouldn't normally play in a deck like that unless you were trying to enable this splashing / the fix that you need for the splash. So that's another thing that's a hidden trap that if I really pulled apart your deck and I said, okay, you've got this sweet dragon that's 1 color off of your base color pair, but you're also playing, some 3 mana thing to ramp up and fix it. Now there's 2 things that are weighing that card down, plus the lands that you have to play to enable it as well. And pretty quickly it becomes obvious that, the Earth Carver is just going to be a better choice most of the time. Okay, one more, Luis.
Let's do it. This is one that is interesting how this has developed through the ages. It's removal and when not to use it. And one thing that hasn't really changed in Limited over the course of our entire draft career really is that good removal, and emphasis on good, has always been at a premium in Limited, which is, it's funny. I remember thinking, especially early on, like, why do people like removal so much? I think a lot of new drafters go through that because, like, isn't it just 1 card for 1 card? And the answer is yes. That is generally at a baseline true. If we're not talking about the card advantage ones, we're mostly just talking about your Molten Exhale murder type cards. Well, not to spend too much time on it, but removal lets you kill the things that you deem most important. You get to use it when you want it. It's often, very often, cheaper than the cards you kill with it in a lot of cases. And removal can kill their best cards in their deck usually. So having an answer for their best cards is very important. But one of the things that's really changed a lot is, despite removal being at a premium, despite it being a very valuable part of your deck, you actually, over time, and this has been a pretty stark effect, you've gotten so much less selective about what you kill. Totally. Going back to one of the first things we mentioned is you have a 3 mana removal spell. It's turn 3. They play a creature. You always kill it. It's your like default a 3/2 creature. Yeah, and you're just killing it. That's the biggest difference, and that is not even a recent change, but it's one worth kind of reiterating because a lot of people are loath to use a good card on a bad card, and let me tell you, you draft removal to kill good cards with it. You still got to use it to kill bad cards plenty of time. And it really comes back to using your mana. If you've got mana, Riverwalk Technique in your hand and 4 mana, The odds that they end the turn and I don't cast that card is approaching zero.
It's
like
very
hopefully
low.
they play something good for you to counter, or they spend their mana on a siege. You're like, wow, this is amazing. Otherwise, I'm going to bounce their 3-drop and maybe they're going to even put it on the bottom. But like, you can't light 4 mana on fire. And most of the time with removal, part of the reason it's good to have a lot of it is because you just kind of have to play it, not indiscriminately exactly, but your threshold to use it for using a removal spell these days has gotten to be pretty low. So
It does. It has.
You should more often use removal than not. That's what all this is building towards.
Yeah, then that's what I liked about Foundations and other sets that'll actually give you that kind of old
that
school
was great
feel.
about that set.
Yeah, you got to really choose. I'm gonna hold off on this. I'm gonna keep this removal because that was one of my favorite parts about Limited when I first started playing was that it really rewarded understanding threats, how important they were, and when to use and not use removal. Because remember, there's other ways to deal with threats besides just using a spell to kill it, right? For example, you could have a good blocker. If your creature's a big, you've got a 4/4 reach and they have a 3/3 flyer, you're doing just fine. And in fact, that can be even better because 1 4/4 reach could hold off 3 3/3 flyers potentially, maybe even 4 of them if your life total's high enough, right? Where they can't just start jamming them into it over and over again. So that was an interesting thing. But it feels like those days are mostly behind us. We get a format like that every once in a while, but usually you're just highly incentivized to stick to the script of using up your mana when possible. And that means that counts for removal as well. And I will say, unfortunately, because I do find the texture of the strategy a little deeper.
I did like it when you had 2 murders and they had a Sheevan Dragon and a Serra Angel, and you had to be like, well, I can't really use murder on anything else. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's too stark of an example. Well, that is how some of the games played out. And this whole point is also why we harp so much on picking up efficient removal versus non-efficient removal, why that's such a big difference.
Yes.
You have a 5-mana removal spell, you're going to have to cast it almost no matter what if you have the mana and they have a creature. You have a Molten Exile or even Caustic Exile for 1 mana. Those you can actually afford to wait on. And that's part of the strength of those cards is you don't need to cast, like, let's say you play turn 3 Dragonstorm Globe, you have Caustic Exile in here, right? The Dream. This is what
that's the Luis curve, yeah.
But maybe what their turn 3 play is like a 2/2 of some kind, and or a Sib-Sig Appraiser, and you're just like, I don't have to kill this. Whereas if instead of playing Globe, you just had 3 mana up and you had a 3-mana removal spell, you had a Dragon's Prayer or whatever. When they play a kind of bad creature on turn 3, you still are mostly like, I guess I just got to kill this thing. But when you have a 1-mana play, no, you can sneak that in later. You don't need to spend the mana. And that is a huge advantage. And there is a big difference. And so much of Magic revolves around mana. How many of these points revolve around mana? Like almost all of them in some form or fashion.
They really do.
It's a core resource of the game. And the difference between a 2-mana and 1-mana removal spell versus 3+ or 4+ is night and day. It might not seem like it, but it is night and day. Like, one of the cards we've always regarded as like an A is Murderous Cut. That's 4 and a black, destroy target creature, instant speed, it has delve, so you can make it cheaper by exiling cards. And that card is like, I would say A- level about, because it's often 1 mana, destroy target creature, instant speed. What is the average grade we give to 5 mana, destroy a creature? It's like a D. So, obviously the difference between 1 and 5 is pretty big, but Murderous Cut even sometimes costs more than 1, but it's still that flexibility, and the fact that it can cost 1 goes a long way. Or even a different example, a 5-mana removal spell versus a 3-mana removal spell is often the difference between like a D and like a C+. And then now you're talking a 2-mana removal spell, that's like a B, Molten Exile, right? So every mana not only makes it obviously cheaper to play and more efficient, it also gives you the more opportunities to not play it because you're not wasting as much mana. And that is a relevant thing to think about, and part of the reason these cheaper cards are so much better. Cheap cards are the best thing to do in Magic, and that is kind of a trend. Some formats can get away from that but it's kind of hard to. I did like that Foundations didn't. And that's one of the most pleasant things about playing older forms of Limited. If you go back and play IPA, or even playing Retro Cube, like the difference between 2 and 3 mana cards kill you if you don't kill them, and so you have to use all your mana, versus you cannot play anything for a couple turns and still be mostly okay. It's nice to have that some of the time. It
is, because you still get punished for that, but it's also cool when it works out and you can kind of deploy a little bit of a different plan. So big picture, all of these have like that core that Luis just mentioned about using up your mana and about tempo mattering these days. If you are somebody who has never considered these, You really, really should just trust us and give it a shot and use it as your baseline and then grow from there. And you will see, I guarantee you will see your win rate go up. And if you're somebody who's maybe you're aware of these, you've listened to the show for a while, but you're kind of like how Luis and I were talking, where it's like, well, I know better, but I let it go a little bit, or I'm not really disciplined about it. Try to double down on this stuff again. This is kind of how you can huddle up and get your fundamentals good. And then you can start to branch out into things that aren't this where appropriate. But I guarantee if these are things that you're not paying attention to and you're not factoring into your day-to-day drafting and you start doing so, you'll see a significant bump. These are definitely the biggest gaps that you can get now. Modern era limited's tough. There's a lot of information. We're no longer the only podcast about limited, let alone, 17 lands and all the data that you can find. Good one,
though, at least.
And what that means is that the playing field is a lot more even than it used to be. But this is the place where you can shore up a ton of win percentage against people who aren't taking advantage of these concepts. All right, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. If you want to find us on social media, Marshall_LR and Luis's LSV, you can find everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com. And we want to thank everybody who supports us on Patreon, as well as Ultimate Guard for their support of the show. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
So I'm pretty sure I actually talked about this at some point, but I wanted to reiterate it in the theme of increasing everyone's, fundamentals and making sure their day-to-day lives are better. I just finished a delicious Turkish coffee, and I want to tell you that the best coffee I ever had, this was a life-changing cup of coffee.
Oh man.
Was at Grand Prix San Diego. This is the one that I think Michael Majors won with Blue Red Mill. I don't know if you remember that one.
I do, yeah.
It was the Sphinx's tutelage plus like card draw deck. I was doing coverage.
Yeah, Treasure Cruise and all that.
And I was walking from, the gas lamp district in San Diego down to the San Diego Convention Center. Oh man, one of the best convention centers to be at. I really like San Diego. My all-time favorite is the Honolulu Convention Center, but this was a nice one too. And on the way, it's just pretty early in the morning. There's no one else out there. There's a little guy who had a cart selling coffee, and he's like, and I'm like, oh, I go up, and he's like, and he's got different kinds of coffee, and he's got this like Turkish cold brew, and I'm like, yeah. So I was, well, what's in that? He's like, well, he's like, it's got cinnamon, cardamom, and cream, and sugar. And I'm like, okay, well, I didn't want the sugar. I don't like sugar in my coffee, but he made it with the other three. He just took cold brew coffee, mixed in some cream, mixed in some cardamom, and mixed in some cinnamon. And it was just like mind blowing. I'm like, this is like the best coffee I've ever had. And I frequently will have coffee with cardamom now and cinnamon, and it's just incredible. So Turkish coffee, like real Turkish coffee is, I don't know how to make that, like that this I got from a Middle Eastern place where they like brew it and it's got like, it's all mixed in. You can actually see the like kind of thick like coffee grounds on the bottom of the cup.
But it comes the way that that you described. It just comes that way.
It doesn't have cream in it generally, but you can add that. But at home, what I do is I just take cold brew and I got a shaker of cardamom and a shaker of cinnamon, and I mix it in with some cream. And I do recommend actually using like an electric stirrer, because cinnamon and cardamom they get a little clumpy if you don't like really whir them. But it's just like a huge flavor upgrade, and also neither of them have calories, so it's you're not paying any cost there. Really efficient.
That's the one drop of coffee.
I just love it. I think it adds just this excellent bit of like depth and complexity, without being overpowering. Though obviously you can put as much or as little in as you want. So that's a little tip to level up your fundamentals. I find it brings me a lot of joy on a day-to-day basis.